TFT Inc. presents The Trilogy of Truth, 3 shocking documentaries produced by 27-year veteran newsman David Hall. The Waco Incident, the video that sparked congressional hearings. Atrocities at Ruby Ridge, the Randy Weaver story. See the government's wrongdoing and why they just awarded Randy Weaver $3.5 million. And The Bomb in Oklahoma, Part 1. See why a special investigation has been launched into a suspected government cover-up. You pay only $65 for all 3 videos. That's a savings of nearly $30 off of retail. Call now to order. 1-800-222-5498. Videos also sold separately.
During the course of the following presentation, it is our intention to bring you the facts as we know them concerning the tragedy that has come to be known as the Waco Incident. As our program unfolds, we feel that our audience must have some knowledge of who the Branch Davidians are. In order to do this, we have an obligation to give you, our viewers, a brief history of the organization. In doing so, we hope to give you some understanding of the inevitable events of April the 19th, 1993. The events you are about to see are real. Here is your host, Christina King. And now, the Waco Incident. The true story.
The founder of the Davidian Church, according to church records, was Victor Hutep, who was born in 1886 in Bulgaria, where he was in the business of supplying processed roses for perfume. He immigrated to the United States, eventually settling in Rockford, Illinois, where he operated a small hotel. In 1918, he joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church at a tent meeting and later moved to Los Angeles. There he became the assistant superintendent of a Seventh-day Adventist church school with about 200 pupils. Hutep's theological views, especially his interpretation of the book of Revelation, did not fit in with the views of the Seventh-day Adventist church. Conflicts arose and Hutep was discharged from his position. Hutep then formed his own group and began publishing The Shepherd's Rod in 1931, a publication in which he printed what he claimed to be inspired messages of the biblical prophecies. In 1935, the group, which called itself the Davidians, moved to Waco, Texas, and established Mount Carmel on 189 acres of land by Lake Waco, basing the location on their interpretation of the scriptures. By 1940, the community had grown to 64 residents and increased their holdings to 377 acres. The group set out earnestly preparing for the second coming of Christ. Hutep soon returned to Los Angeles and called for a like-minded exodus of people. 7 families came and they established a common fund and began building a temporary structure. By the end of the year, 37 families had migrated to the community. The mission of the group was recruitment of the 144,000, a number referred to in the 7th chapter of Revelations. Tens of thousands of pamphlets were mailed to Seventh-day Adventists. At that time, Hutep thought that life at Mount Carmel would last less than a year. But as the years passed, the community continued to grow. As the Depression wore on, the Mount Carmel community developed its own monetary system with green currency and round cardboard discs. The money was used in the Mount Carmel Mercantile Department in exchange for needed articles or deposited in the Mount Carmel Bank of Palestine. Children as well as adults were required to work in groups divided by age. For example, children ages 4 to 8 were required to work 26 hours per week for a few cents per hour. By the time they were 18, they worked a full 8-hour day. The community was not permitted to associate with outsiders except for business purposes, and marrying a non-believer was strictly forbidden. A major crisis came in 1955 when Hutef died. Many of the believers were dumbfounded. Hutef's wife, Florence, assumed the leadership of the community. By November 5, 1955, Florence Hutef sent out a message in the symbolic code published in the Davidian Monthly Magazine that April 22, 1959 would be the establishment of the kingdom. Hundreds of followers joined the group, disposing of their property and businesses and contributing their money to the organization. The overflow of the people was accommodated in about 75 tents on the grounds. The group was waiting for a sign. Leaders hinted that it might be the resurrection of Hutef, their Elijah, who was to return just before the Lord. During that period, the Ben Roden family had joined the group. By May 5, 1959, 500 or 600 of the followers that had been waiting for the sign began to leave Mount Carmel, which still had funds in excess of $200,000 as well as property. In March of 1962, Florence Hutef sold all the Davidians' property but 77 acres. During this period, Ben Roden Sr. took control of the remaining property. Ben Roden maintained leadership of the church until his death in 1978. In 1976, young George Roden ran for President of the United States on the Democratic ticket. Roden's election platform commitments most likely tell who the man was. He had 13 specific mandates that he would work for if elected. Those were a sensible solution for the oil crisis, first home policy, a get tough foreign policy, government loans for families with income under $15,000, and that loan would be fixed at 2% interest. Government would provide 2% loans for children with elderly parents to build homes for them. Any veteran would draw $350 monthly, and any disabled veteran $750 monthly. A national health program, stop cattle imports, a large space program, guaranteed college education, fund church schools, tax exempt for all churches, build a large interstate highway system, and a national Sunday law. By 1984, what few members were left became totally dissatisfied with his teachings and conduct. Many questioned his mental stability.
This time, something prompted Vernon Wayne Howell to write George this letter, dated January the 28th, 1984. Dear George, how are you doing? I know that you were going through some very hard times. I also know why. I miss Mount Carmel so much. It is a shame that the Holy Spirit has to leave there. I wrote this letter a few days ago, but because of changed circumstances, points are omitted. The purpose of this letter is to bring out the truth of Revelation chapter 14. You feel that it is your duty to build the temple and call out the 144,000, right? I hope that in the study you will be able to see the grave mistake that has been made. Revelation 14 brings to view the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion with the Lamb. They are learning, as it were, the new song. They have one seal in their foreheads, Father's name. This designates that they have received the seal of the Sabbath. But notice, George, they only have the Sabbath seal. Where is the seal of New Jerusalem, or Christ's new name? The truth is, they do not have them. That's right, George. These 144,000 are saved, yet they do not have all the seals. This can only mean that your teaching, closing probation for the Adventists, must be wrong. If the 144,000 can be saved with just one seal, Sabbath, then don't you think others can too? The Sabbath seal was brought by Sister White, the Kingdom seal by Victor Hutef, and the new seal by Ben Roden. So as you should be able to plainly see, the 144,000 do not have to have Brother Hutef's or Brother Roden's messages to be saved. This is presented to you, George, so you can consider your ways. You need also to put away your guns. There is no one at Mount Carmel that wants to hurt you. And besides, if God is for you, who can be against you? Now look, As the 144,000 stand on Mount Zion, they learn all the other truths that they need, and Revelation chapter 15 brings to view the harps of Revelation chapter 14. These harpers are the wave sheaf. They are the ones who get the victory first. They teach the 144,000 the song of Moses, rod, kingdom, and the song of the Lamb, Christ's new name, inspiration. Isn't this wonderful, George? I could go into greater detail, but for now, it is better not to. You also know that the angel of Revelation, chapter 14, verse 17, is what I claim to be. I teach in the name of the Lord that this angel takes the title David. The reason that David was the seventh son of Jesse. Revelation chapter 10 tells us that when the seventh angel shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished. One of these mysteries is that ever since 1955, the Lord has been gathering the wave sheaf. All of Revelation chapter 14 is for the gathering of the wave sheaf first. Then, the rest of the work is finished in power. Verse 7 of Revelation 10 says, "But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound." The word voice shows that the angel speaks to the people before he sounds his trumpet. This is why I teach, George, that this message hasn't really started yet. God is giving the branches every possible way to be saved. This is the probationary year for the branches. Oh, George, I hope that this point will do you some good. May God help you to see. I could give 10 times more proof than what this letter contains, but would that do you any good? Please consider the fate of Saul.
1 year later, David wrote this letter to branch believers.
The time has come that most drastic measures be taken on those who profess the present truth. Seventh angel. We as individuals are to be preparing for our move to Mount Carmel so as to be able to learn the truth so dear for this time. You cannot learn the truth of the seventh angel while sitting snug in your sealed houses awaiting for some power to come upon you to tell you the truth. You must come and dine yourself. All branches are to obtain a living experience in the truth for these days. Now, for those of you who have not been wise in your correspondence and know nothing of the availability of the serpent's root tapes, they are now available upon request. Mark this point with care. If you request them, we shall gladly hasten them to you. But if you do not request them, they shall not be sent. Don't delay. Ask now. Love, Vernon W. Howell.
By 1986, Hal and a group of his followers were threatening a takeover of the Mount Carmel Center. In 1987, Hal and his group did successfully take over the center. Waco, Texas, a community of about 190,000 and home of Baylor University. A relatively quiet community, not much different than the one you and I live in, other than it was home to the Branch Davidians, a group of people who lived by the Bible, and more importantly, the Word of God. Everyone knew of Waco, but not many knew about the community. On February 28, 1993, all that changed. Now Waco has a black cloud hovering above that has no silver lining. An arrest warrant was issued for Vernon Wayne Howell on February 25, 1993. The warrant was signed by U.S. Magistrate Dennis G. Green, Magistrate for the Western District of Texas in Waco. The warrant, captioned W93-17M, alleged unlawful possession of a destructive device. The principal investigators in obtaining the warrant were ATF agents David Aguilera of Austin, Texas, Carlos Torres of Houston, Texas, agent in charge of the Little Rock ATF, Bill Buford, agent Jerry A. Taylor of Walnut Creek, California, agent Earl Dunnigan of Austin, Texas, and agent Robert Rodriguez of San Antonio, Texas. The warrants, after being examined by several state judges at our request, were determined by them not to have sufficient evidence for the search or the arrest of David Koresh Vernon Wayne Howe. The information contained in the affidavit was based solely on hearsay statements, and furthermore, most of the people making these statements were known to be people that had axes to grind with Koresh and the Davidians. Page 2 of the affidavit states that a UPS delivery man became suspicious and concerned because of the frequency of COD deliveries to the complex and the manner in which they were paid for, which was cash. While at the complex, he states that he saw several manned observation posts that he believed were armed. These statements by the UPS employee are based on assumption and not fact. Page 4 of the affidavit, a Mr. Cervinka, who farms the property just east of Mount Carmel, stated that from January to February of 1992, he heard machine gun fire on the Vernon Howe property during the night hours. He further states that the gunfire he heard was being shot with a .50 caliber machine gun or possibly an M16 machine gun. Now, in this same sworn statement that Mr. Cervinka made on July 21, 1992, he states that he has been a farmer since 1948. So we must consider here that Mr. Cervinka is not a gun expert, nor did he see any guns. On page 5 of the affidavit, ATF agent Davey Aguilera, who signed the application for a search warrant and also signed the application for the arrest warrant, states that he requested a search of the records of the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record in Washington, D.C. to determine if Vernon W. Howe and or Paul G. Fada, one of Howe's closest followers, had any machine guns or other NFA weapons registered to them. The result was negative. Also on June 9, 1992, he requested a search of the records of the licensing section of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms at Atlanta, Georgia, to determine if Howe or Fada were licensed as firearms dealers or manufacturers. Again, the search was negative. On June 10, 1992, he made a search of records at Atlanta on the name of David Koresh and David M. Jones, and again, the search came back negative. It is unclear why Agent Aguilera was running license and registration searches on Koresh, Fada, and Jones when he knew that Koresh and McMahon were partners and McMahon held a Class 3 gun license. David Koresh, Paul Fada, and Henry McMahon had been checked many times by ATF agents at Houston and San Antonio selling firearms at gun shows and flea markets. Branch Davidians had stated many times that they were selling guns as a livelihood. The Class 3 federal license, which is a dealer's license, grants the dealer the authorization to own automatic weapons, such as machine guns, AK-47s, as well as numerous other weapons. On December 11, 1992, Robin Bunz, Koresh's ex-wife, was interviewed. She states that she had left the complex in 1990 as a result of Koresh becoming progressively more violent and abusive. On December 12, 1992, Janine Bunz, the mother of Robin, stated that she did see AK-47s while at the complex. She further states that in July of 1991, she witnessed Koresh firing a machine gun. Janine Bunz says the reason she knew this was a machine gun was because it fired fast and tore up the ground. She also stated that Koresh fathered at least 15 children, and some of the mothers were as young as 12 years old. She states that Koresh annuls all marriages of couples who join his group. On January 7, 1993, Deborah Sue Bunz was interviewed. Deborah is the wife of David Bunz, who is the son of Janine Bunz and the brother of Robin, Koresh's ex-wife. Deborah states that she first met Koresh in July of 1980 when he assumed leadership of the group in Waco, Texas. Deborah stated that when David shot the machine gun, he expressed a desire to own additional machine guns, and specifically AK-47 type machine guns. Again, in examining the statements made by Robin, Janine, and Deborah Sue Bunz, we must consider that all three left the complex in anger. Robin, the ex-wife, Janine, the mother-in-law, and Deborah, the sister-in-law, none of which claimed to have expertise in weapons. Deborah Bunn stated that she first met David in 1980 when he assumed leadership of the branch. This statement creates a great deal of concern as it is well documented by ATF, FBI, and local government, as well as the Branch Davidians, that David did not take over the leadership of the group until 1982. Looking again at the statements made by David Koresh's mother-in-law that she delivered at least 15 children that belonged to Koresh, Janine Bunns came to the complex in late 1988 and left in September of 1991. During that period of time, only 10 children were born at the complex. We came to the conclusion after examining all of the children's birth dates that survived the fire, as well as the children that were killed in the fire. A total of 43 children were at the complex. 22 of those children, plus 2 unborn fetuses, died in the fire. 3 of the children that died in the fire had the last name of Hal or Koresh. Those children were Bobby L. Koresh, 2 years of age, Star Hal, age 6, and Cyrus Hal, age 8. None of the survivors carried the name of Hal or Koresh. Cyrus and Star were both born before Vernon Wayne Hal took the name David Koresh. After that name change, Bobby L. Koresh was born. This would indicate that he was giving the Koresh name to the children he fathered. On January 8, 1993, a statement was taken from Mark Burrow in Los Angeles, California. He is an American citizen who lives in Australia with his wife. He states that he was once a member of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. He lived at Mount Carmel Complex from early 1988 until September of 1989. While there, he participated in physical training and firearm shooting exercises conducted by Hal. He also states that he stood guard armed with a loaded weapon. The type of gun or caliber was never brought out in this statement by Burrow or by the agency doing the interview. This seems strange to us, as in all other interviews, agents were careful to identify the types of weapons and caliber that were mentioned by the subject that was being interviewed. At this point, we felt that a further study of Mark Burrow's background was warranted. Although we will continue with this sworn statement, and at the end of this interview, we will give you the results of our background check. Burrow said men that stood guard duty were instructed to shoot to kill anyone who entered the property. Again, here we have to take issue with this statement. Sheriff's deputies, mailmen, and other people have made statements to our reporter that they had never been accosted by armed guards when entering the complex. And now for the finale of our investigation of Mark Burrow, which led us to the state of Michigan. Mark Burrow was declared legally blind in 1986 by doctors in that state. It would hardly be reasonable by any sense of the word to place a blind man on guard duty. The Texas State Technical College, just north of Waco on Interstate 35, was the base of operations for the ATF and later the FBI. The college was a former Air Force base that was deactivated and given to the state of Texas. It is presently being used as a technical college, and some areas of the facility are being leased to large companies doing top-secret research on laser and infrared technology. These companies are funded by United States government contracts. This building was leased by the ATF in 1992, according to firemen that worked at the college. They stated that the base was reactivated on February 28, 1993 by ATF, FBI, CIA, and Army intelligence officers. On this cold, misty February morning, these officers of law were busy preparing for a raid on a small group of people called the Branch Davidians, a small religious sect some 15 miles northeast of Waco. Just days before, Agent Daryl Dyer, support coordinator for the ATF operation, arrived at Waco. He was astonished to find that a plan of operation had not been drawn up. Dyer and Agent William Crone took it upon themselves to produce one. However, it was never distributed to the men. It remained in Crone's desk. Then there was the Texas National Guard helicopters you see in the background. Texas Governor Ann Richards publicly complained that the ATF had deceived state officials in obtaining National Guard helicopters for the assault by claiming they had evidence that the group was involved in drug trafficking. Texas state law provisions forbid the use of state-controlled aircraft to federal law enforcement agencies except in drug cases. An ATF source in Texas stated that the ATF had fabricated the allegation to gain control of the aircraft. And worse yet, these same men were about to start out on a raid, leaving behind their ill-gotten search warrant. Undaunted, they proceeded to infamy. This operation, unknowingly to some, will go down in history as the darkest day of law enforcement history in this country. Just before the raid was to start, undercover agent Robert Rodriguez called in his report to headquarters that everything was normal at the complex. Special agent in charge of operations, Philip Hojanaki, gave the orders to proceed.
before anybody gets hurt. Is anybody hurt in there, Wayne? We need to get on somebody to tell them. Yeah. Who's hurt, Wayne?
The net result of the bungled raid was 6 Branch Davidians dead. They were Winston Blake, Peter Hipsman, Perry Jones, Peter Gent, Jadine Wendell, and Michael Schroeder. Schroeder was shot 6 times in the back while crossing a pasture attempting to gain entry to the complex. In the death of Schroeder, we would have to ask about the use of deadly force, as there was clearly no threat against any ATF agents in his death. He died late in the evening of the 28th. 5 other Davidians were also injured during the initial raid by gunshots. The ATF sustained 4 dead and 16 injured. The dead were Todd McKeon, Conway LeBleu, Robert J. Williams, and Stephen Willis. The logic that went into the planning of this particular raid showed the American public, at best, the ATF had very poor generals. What commander would call the press the night before to notify them of the pending raid, then attempt to perfect it at 10 a.m. in the morning during broad daylight, then attempt to proceed almost 1/2 a mile to the center of a pasture with 100 men and no cover whatsoever? The planning would be indicative of a show for the American public. The code name used by the ATF for the raid was Showtime. Who shot first? Well, according to ATF agents Roland Balestros and Eric Evers, the ATF shot first. They told the Texas Rangers the feds fired first, but later retracted their statements. In a court hearing, Balestros admitted that in his statement to Texas Rangers 10 days after the raid and during a preliminary hearing in the fall of 1993, he made no mention of anyone yelling anything about police or a search warrant. His first 2 accounts of the raid indicated his belief was the ATF fired first with no warning. Another agent, Samuel Cohen, stated that before he could get out of the trailer, agents were already firing on the complex. ATF agent Roland Balestros was the agent assigned to enter the complex first, so it would only be natural to think that he would know if he announced himself or not. We could not find in court records or other statements he made that he ever stated that he was an ATF agent or that he had a search warrant. As the infamous day rolled on, federal authorities felt they had to do something. So they requested 10 Bradley fighting vehicles to use in the standoff from the Texas National Guard. The Bradleys are armored personnel carriers using tracks similar to tanks. Commonly, the Bradleys carry a 25mm chain gun, a machine gun, missile launchers, and night vision equipment. The National Guard was told the Bradleys would be used for defensive purposes only. After several hours of negotiations throughout the day and into the night, 2 children made the decision to leave the complex around 9:15 that evening. Around 10:05, Hal was permitted to speak to KRLD Radio out of Dallas, Texas. Hal spoke to radio announcer Ron Engelman for about 20 minutes about his beliefs and the severity of his wounds, explaining that he was the most seriously wounded member of the group. Not long after the radio interview, at approximately 10:30, 2 more children made the decision to leave the complex. At 1:50 a.m. Monday morning, Hal again spoke with KRLD Radio in a live interview for about 25 minutes. This time, Hal spoke about the gun battle that ensued, stating that it was totally unnecessary. This broadcast would be the last public comment Hal would be permitted to make.
You have guns?
Yeah, we have some.
Can you show me?
In some of the houses, you know.
Well, can we see that? Is that okay?
Well, I guess if you want. You know. Now, this right here is what I told you in the beginning. You know what the public thinks about guns. You know in this country right now, legislation is to ban all guns, right? And it makes nobody's business whether we have a gun or not at this place. Guns are the right of Americans to have. You know, it's bringing up guns in a situation like this is something that can be, you know how people think. You know, y'all don't have guns in Australia.
Yeah.
You know, the reason why is because your government says, you know, you people are not supposed to have them. Our government says we can.
So you keep your guns?
Yeah, we got a gun here, got a gun there. You know. It's, like I said, most of the guns were sold. It's just not the issue we're dealing with right now, dealing with religion. A lot of people say, he's got guns, that makes him bad, that makes him a cult. You know? It's just a raw deal in this touchy subject we're dealing with.
Would you use a gun if somebody came in here? If somebody trespassed?
People trespass all the time. We use a gun? No, we don't. We don't. They come in here with a gun and they start shooting at us. What would you do? Tell me, be realistic. This is America. This is not Australia. This is not Europe. This is not where a country overthrows a bunch of people, takes away their weapons so that the people cannot argue any issues. Our Constitution states that every citizen in America has the right to rebuttal their government. Now, we don't want to rebuttal the government. Our government's the greatest in the world. We have freedom, not freedom for religion, not freedom for state, but freedom for all, you see? And that's what a lot of people don't understand. Did King David have swords? Did Jesus tell the apostles to carry a sword with you? Yes. This is for the little children, right? God knows how it should be. Stars and stripes are flying, give us justice and liberty for the children's sake. You know, you might have to bear a gun one day.
Monday, March 1st, 1993, proved to be an important day during the 51-day siege. On this day, the FBI was appointed by the Justice Department to take over negotiations and decision-making from there on out. Most agents that were part of the initial attack on the complex were sent home. This included the ATF agents on the ground, as well as the helicopter pilots and the ATF agents in the air. Throughout the siege, the public was informed that the helicopter pilots were working for the Texas National Guard. During our investigation, we found one of the pilots who flew a helicopter during the Waco raid. This pilot informed us that he was a retired Vietnam veteran out of Fort Worth, Texas, who was reactivated to Fort Hood specifically for the raid at Waco. As our reporter got into conversation with him about his instructions for the mission, he informed us that he was sworn to secrecy about what transpired and could not speak about what happened in Waco at all. This statement prompted us to dig even deeper. We then made a call to Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, and were astonished by the response we received from Major O'Rourke about the operation.
Yes. How you doing, sir? It's Major O'Rourke.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I wanted to return your call.
Yeah.
I made several calls and got most of what I think is the accurate information. But the problem with answering the questions is it cuts across so many different government lines.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm still waiting to hear back from the FBI. Because it was totally an FBI operation. That was up there, so to see if they had any problem with us releasing any information. I haven't heard back from them yet. And I just called them again after you called.
What is your fear of...
I have no fear.
Well, if I'm talking with a major in the United States Army, and he's telling me the FBI is dictating what he says.
No, you gotta understand that people have jurisdiction over events. Any event that's involving litigation or law enforcement, then there's someone who has jurisdiction over the event. Okay, for instance, we get calls in on, say, a soldier got in trouble downtown.
Oh, I understand.
And they would want to know, well, what's going on with the soldier and all that. Well, we don't have I may have some information on it, but I don't have jurisdiction over it. Okay, so the person who has a jurisdiction is the one who has to make the call under the law as to what can be, what is releasable, what is not releasable, what needs to be not released for future litigation purposes. That's the whole idea there. So that's the only reason I wanted to verify with the FBI.
Well, the problem I have is, again, and I will reiterate this to you, that ultimately the Army has to accept the responsibility for their action, and the FBI cannot accept that responsibility.
Well, what actions do you think we need to accept responsibility?
Well, I think that the action is that you provided equipment and manpower are in this operation. And I'm trying to find out who ordered that. And I'm getting stonewalled by the FBI. I'm getting stonewalled by you. Now, somebody somewhere, and again, the public has a right to know. We need to know what our military is doing. And we also need to have access to what the FBI, and litigation at this point in time, I think, is not an issue at all. I think the issue is coming clean and saying, yes, we did this, or we did not do this. And the American public has this right to know.
Well, I understand the question was, does anybody from Fort Hood Personnel Equipment participate in the second raid, correct?
Overall in the operation of the attack on the Davidian complex is what I'm asking. And I'm not getting anywhere with you, FBI, or anyone else in this. And you know, I don't think we should have to go to Congress to find out what our military's done, or the FBI. I think the FBI has nothing at all to do with your operation at Fort Hood. And ultimately, I feel like that, you know, you are responsible. If they told you to go out here and do this, I want to know where their authority come from to tell you to do this.
Well, there are very strict rules, regulations, laws regarding the use of military force in civilian law enforcement, and we don't get involved in doing that at all.
Exactly.
And I tell you that's the law, and that's the law we follow. Yeah.
Well, that's where I'm troubled. You know, there's very strict law. Our Constitution does not allow you to enter into a police action against a citizen of the United States.
Exactly. We didn't do that.
Well, the evidence that we have and the videotape that we have, sir, totally tells a different story. Now, you know, so that's where I'm problemed, and the FBI is wanting to tell me one thing, and the ATF tells me another thing, and no one is willing to accept the responsibility for those Bradleys being out there. And again, you're telling me now because of litigation, you're not.
What I want to do is just, you know, I realize you've been waiting a while, but the story's not, you know.
No, we're not under pressure here.
Compounded. I'm trying to find out what, and intend to give you, you know, once I get, you know, all the permission signed, to give you the information on what support we provided in any way regarding that operation. And I can tell you off the record, it was very, very limited.
Contrary to the Constitution, the military was involved in a police action. Later, Monday afternoon, Delroy Nash, who was caught by ATF and FBI agents as he was sneaking into the complex the evening of February 28th, was charged with attempted murder of a federal agent. Monday night, 10 more children made the decision to come out of the complex. Early Tuesday morning, March 2nd, 2 women and 6 children came out of the complex. The women were Catherine Matheson and Margaret Lawson. Both were charged with conspiracy to murder a federal agent. Both women carried Bibles in hand as they exited the complex. The Bibles were immediately confiscated from them. In addition to the Bible, Catherine Matheson also brought out a videotape that Hal and the Davidians made while inside the complex. This was to show that no one was being held against their will, and also to prove that the children were not being abused. The videotape, which is about 2 hours long, lets everyone inside tell their story of what happened the day of the raid. It was never released by federal agents until after the fiery end, 48 days later. Federal agents stated that the reason they never released the video during the siege was because they felt it would stir the sympathy of the American people, and the siege would not continue if we were to see the type of people that were really inside the complex.
We know David Koresh was an avid jogger. He jogged up his driveway and through the gates of Mount Carmel 2 to 3 times a week. Now, on a regular basis, he would jog 5 miles at a time. Now, just across the street is the house that ATF agents rented to keep Mr. Koresh under surveillance. They had this house rented for quite some time. Now, at any given time, Mr. Koresh could have been arrested without incident.
Other interesting facts about the raid of the 28th that did not come out was that Paul Fata had taken most of the guns out of the complex on Saturday, the 27th of February. Of course, this was normal as the Davidians sold guns at flea markets and gun shows on weekends. The weekend of February the 27th, Paul Fata was selling guns in Austin, Texas at a flea market. This has been confirmed by people at the flea market. It was also stated that no phone taps or electronic surveillance were set up at the complex. But these 12 phone lines running from the complex directly to the surveillance house set up by the ATF tell a different story. Why would the ATF drive a tank through a building when the owner was on hand and offered to give them the keys to enter? This was the building called the Mag Bag, which the Davidians had rented to work on cars. Were they also mad at the Waco Tribune Herald? This is the remains of one of their vehicles after the ATF ran a tank over it. Sheila Martin, the wife of Wayne Martin, who called the sheriff's office seeking help on the 911 call, had this to say about the events of that day.
The ones that they were getting ready to go to the sandbox, I was getting them ready to go out. The little boy that's handicapped has been that way since he was 4 months old, since he had meningitis. He had been just laying there getting ready for me to come over. He knows when things are going on in the room. He could hear us speaking, but he can't see, he can't move. I felt there was, as every morning, to leave him there and get ready to feed him and to get him ready to go out. And we hold him in his lap, and in our laps, and he's not able to do anything at all. So there's nothing that made me feel that I had to feel like I had to protect him for any reason. He was laying there, and after these shots were in the front door, very soon all the shots came in through the window. I turned to put the 2 children down, and when I went to get him, everything was breaking up around him. The whole window, everything, wood, every glass, everything was just falling all over him. He was screaming at the top of his lungs. He couldn't do anything but just stay there. His body was stiffened up because that's all he does. If he gets ready to move, that's all there's no turning either way. There was no way for him to move. And I just thought this was it. He had no way of getting out of the way. I had no way of getting to him. I was certain that this was how he was going to die. And at one little second, all the shooting stopped, and I crawled to my hands and my knees and put my arm on him. He has a very stiff elbow, and that's all I could do was to grab him and to pull him. And as I did that, all the shots started coming again. And I stayed down, I pulled him down, and we went over to the corner where the other children were. And they were crying and wondering what's going on. And my son said, "Why are they coming? Why are they doing this?" And the little girl was just sitting there just crying with, all this fright. And so I at that point, I just hoped that would be the worst, and we'd keep ourselves protected by everything. But I realized later, after I saw all the damage, there was no way, except that God protected us, that those bullets would not have come and penetrated and hit us also. And even though I tried to do things to keep them safe, I realized that anything could have come up through the floor. There's no way to keep us safe except God protected us. Well, first of all, we had a hope that God was going to take us through, not only as he did the first day, but throughout the whole time that we had to be in there. We had expected to come out at some point because David had promised them and negotiated, said, we're coming out, we're going to cooperate. The children went first, the first 21 children. My 2 children were the last to go out with Catherine Madison. But up to those 3 days, we still wondered, were they going to come and still come get us in the middle of the night? It was like 6 o'clock in the morning, things were still dark. That was the morning after the raid, the first day. And we wondered, are they coming 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 or 5? Any of those early morning hours, we wondered if they were going to come in with tear gas, with any type of tank or something like that. And those were the scariest days because we knew that they were angry and we knew that they could come. After they said, we're waiting for you. We won't hurt you. We relaxed a little bit, but we still expected every day, every morning when the sun came up. Then we said, we passed another day has happened. We didn't think they'd come. Once the sun came up, we didn't expect them to come out. We felt somehow that we had one more day to live. That was what were going to let us do. But basically, we thought at first that they still had a chance of coming. We'd see things all through the night, trucks, and say things on the radio like they're coming. We see this happening, that, and we kept wondering what was going to happen.
We have continuously stated here that we have specifically asked of Mr. Koresh whether he intends to commit suicide and whether his followers intend to commit suicide. He, on each of those occasions where that has been raised, has stated that that is not his intention at all. In fact, we believe, after many discussions with him, that this would be completely contrary to his religious philosophy, that he does not want to fulfill his prophecies by taking his own life.
By April 13th, the agents in charge in the field, after meeting with the officials of the Justice Department, apparently decided to end the siege regardless of the loss of human life. The plan that was set into motion was to introduce CS gas into the buildings over a 48-hour period of time. If the occupants did not start coming out by that time, they would begin to systematically collapse the building so as to force them out. This plan, even if given the best set of circumstances, could only be a failure. First, the government knew the children did not have any gas masks, and the CS gas could prove lethal to the children. Second, there were wounded men, women, and children inside that would not be able to come out on their own. And on the far side, if they collapsed the building down around them, how many people would be crushed by this action? Field commanders had a meeting with Texas Child Protective caseworker Joyce Sparks and her staff. Concerns were voiced about the safety of the children because it was a well-known fact they did not have gas masks. Concerns were put to rest by the field commanders. Light doses of gas would be used, which would pose no threat to the children. On the day of implementation of the plan, it was agreed that Joyce Sparks would be notified prior to the introduction of the CS agent. She and her staff were to meet at a designated site where portable showers and fresh clothes would be provided to evacuees when they came out. Agents, after eating breakfast at this restaurant in Waco, left this layout of the complex behind. A waitress at the restaurant supplied us with it. As you can see, the layout defines where each individual is at in the complex. The surveillance equipment they used in and outside the building gave the agents information to all movements inside. The interesting thing is that the tanks driving up in the building were actually ramming into areas where they knew people were. The end result of this was that Judy Schneider, 40 years old, was buried alive by rubble. Audrey Martinez, 13 years old, buried alive. Unidentified female, 6 years old, died of suffocation. Unidentified female, 14 years old, died of blunt force trauma to the head. Several others also died from tanks either running up over them or falling debris.
At 5:55 a.m. on April the 19th, the FBI called 3 different Dallas hospitals and put them on standby to receive heavy casualties. Parkland Memorial, in particular, was asked how many beds would be available in the burn unit and instructions to land the military helicopters. At 6 a.m., the FBI and the ATF start injecting CS gas into the complex, contrary to the agreed plan of light doses because the children had no gas mask. Massive amounts of CS are injected by the CVs, and the ferret rounds with CS fired into the complex for 6 hours straight. At this point, we must keep in mind that the FBI and the ATF are fully aware that Davidians are using kerosene lanterns inside, both day and night, and the location of the lanterns due to the infrared surveillance equipment in the air and on the ground at the complex. They were also aware the fire potential and lethal capabilities of CS when it is misused, due to their own SWAT team manual as well as the chemical company's manuals. It should also be noted that CS was banned by the Geneva Convention.
A letter dated August 18, 1993, from Major General David McElvoy on behalf of General Colin Powell notes specifically the median lethal dose compared to the incapacitating dose and the method of dispersal, primarily by incendiary device. It is a well-known fact that the CS agent used on the Davidians far exceeded the levels stated in this letter. Combining all the information contained in these reports submitted to you, the logical conclusion is that the predicate is set for premeditated murder. April 19th, 1993, tear gassing starts. Joyce Sparks was not notified by the field commanders. As discussed, at approximately 9:30 a.m., Sparks received a call initiated through the governor's office asking why she is not at the complex. She explains the FBI did not inform her. She then immediately places a call to field headquarters and angrily asked why she was not informed. She received no reply. She then asked if she should attempt to assemble her staff to get out there. The agent states that he does not know if anyone is coming out of the complex. She hangs up the phone and tells her husband they intend to kill them all. The original plan for the insertion of the CS agent was to be gradually injected over a 48-hour period. The original plan was aborted. The FBI states due to gunfire from the Davidians at the tanks. We were told by the survivors that was not the case. They stated they were choking, coughing, and sick. They further stated they were in no condition to be shooting as alleged by the FBI. And even if we discount the Davidian statements, small arms gunfire would hardly be a match for an Abrams tank with 1 foot of armor. This is also inconsistent with the video showing agents walking freely around the outside of the building while the CS gas is being injected.
Clive, if you can, tell me about the last 5 minutes before the actual fire erupted. What was going through your mind whenever you were trying to get out of that building and out of that inferno that was going on around you? What was going through your mind, and just what happened in those last 5 minutes?
Well, I'd been sick in bed all day the day before, and all of that morning as well. So I'd probably spent most of the morning laying on the floor in the church. We'd endured 6 hours of either being sprayed on us with the CEV tanks or fired at us with the ferret rounds.
So the tanks with the battering rams actually were shooting gas into the compound.
They had tanks or canisters of some kind that they would spray in from the boom. They would drive. The last time they came in, they came through the front door, and you could see the boom in the church from where we were. They came all that way, like probably 10, 20 yards.
Okay. So what happened after you were laying down most of the morning? You were sick.
When the tanks would come through the front door, we would, of course, get up. I'd get up off the floor. Some of the others that were there we'd kind of move away from it so that we weren't standing right in front of the doorway or the hallway that was there. And so we would move back to the other side of the church, and I guess it was about noon or within a few minutes of that somebody come running in and said the building was on fire. So I knew that they had broken a hole in the wall of the church on the other side of a partition that divided the stage. And so I went around behind this partition to where that hole was, and several other people came in behind me, and we were kind of deciding what we would do. And the next thing we knew, there was black smoke pouring in the hole from the outside. I guess it was blowing along the outside of the building, and the way the wind was blowing, it made it come in the hole rather than out. And you could hardly see a thing. It was so black at times. The wind was pretty turbulent. And at one point, we made efforts to throw a little dog out that I'd been taken care of in the church throughout the siege. We threw the little dog out about 3 times before she finally stayed out. Probably the reason she kept coming in was because she had pups, that had been born in the church, but which we had put into the gymnasium, and she was probably worried about them. But eventually she stayed out, and shortly after we'd thrown her out the hole, all I can remember is a tremendous amount of heat. There were flames licking through the joins in the sheetrock, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, rolling around trying to protect my hands, trying to protect my face, and other people, I could hear them screaming and rolling around on the floor behind me. And I guess the noise of their agony and probably my own agony, I was probably screaming too, but I don't remember exactly. But I guess that's what galvanized me, and I jumped up and dived headfirst over a heap of sheetrock and wood that was on the inside of the hole, landed in a heap face down on the outside of the building. And I can remember standing up and seeing all the skin peeling off my hands. It was just kind of rolling off. And I looked back over my shoulder, and the whole doorway behind me was just a mass of flames by that time, and I thought to myself, I've got to get away from the building. People were saying, well, what are we going to do? You know, there was the concern that there was sniper positions, at least 2 of them on the south side that we knew of. There probably were more, but we knew of 2 that were fairly close, and we didn't know whether we'd be shot if we came out or just what the situation would be. But by the time I came out, the trauma of the smoke and the heat and the flames and being burned and thinking that everybody else was dead and I was the only one, I was kind of in shock, I guess, and I staggered away from the building and ran into the barbed wire fence that they had put up around the building itself, and I'd forgotten about its existence, even though I knew it was there. Just being in a state of shock, I'd forgotten that, and so I ran into it and kind of pulled me up with a jerk, and I thought, oh, what's this, you know, and I looked to my right, and that was the first time I saw some of the other guys that had been in the same area as me. They were walking up toward the front gate. They were probably a third of the way to the front gate with their hands in the air. And it was at that point I realized I wasn't the only one that had come out. So I began to follow them up to the front gate.
And did the ATF come after you? Anybody come out to help you after that fire, after they knew that survivors were out there?
Nobody came near us as far as coming up to us. What happened was I began to follow the guys up to the gate. I was quite a ways behind them, and as I rounded the corner, there's a curve in the road, and as I kind of got into that curve, I noticed there was a Bradley or some kind of tank over near the tree that was next to what we called the boat shed, and there was I presume an FBI agent with a gun trained on me, screaming at me to come over toward him. Instead of going up the gate with the others, he called me aside, and so I made my way to him, and he was screaming and swearing at me, wanting to know where the children were and so forth and so on. And I says, well, I hadn't seen the children. I didn't know where they might be. I suggested, I think, that they might be in the bus. That would be a logical place to put them, because at that time I didn't know that was the first the first area that had been gassed early that morning. I didn't know that. So I suggested maybe they'd be in the bus, but I really didn't know. And so he told me to get on up to the gate and threatened that if I made a false move, he'd blow my head off, things like that.
Did they ever offer medical assistance? Could they see that you were...
Not at that point. When I finally got up to the gate, they already had, I think it was 4 other guys that had come out, laying on the ground handcuffed. They made me get down. They put handcuffs on me, even though my hands were burned. And then a little while later, they brought Ruth Riddle up and proceeded to question her about where the children were, and she wouldn't answer them, and so they took her by the hair and were jerking her head back and forth, trying to get her to answer them. And somebody says, you better stop that, you're on camera, and so they let her hair go. And they turned to me and says, well, tell us her name. She won't answer questions. I said, if she doesn't want to talk, that's her business. I didn't know what her state was. I found out later that she was burned on her knees and had a broken leg, so she was probably in shock.
With me is Gordon Novell, who has served as a special investigator for 3 different presidents and is also investigating this.
Gordon, right off the bat, what can you tell us about this particular scene that we have behind us now?
It basically depicts the systematic venting of the building, establishing fire flue holes in the building for the purposes of allowing the air to accelerate through the building and burn it down very, very rapidly.
Now, how would the building burn so rapidly, as everybody saw, not only the witnesses that were there, but also across the nation on TV?
Because of the velocity of the oxygen going through the building mixed with the CS gas, which functioned, in this case, as a high-temperature accelerant to spread the flame like a flamethrower.
Now, this gas is a CS gas, from what we have been told. Regular tear gas, some people may commonly refer to it. But the CS gas, when it's exposed to any type of flame, seems to have an explosive nature to it.
Like coal dust.
And what effect? Now, they also used dilutants in this, from what the information we've been able to gather. That served as almost a propellant, you would say.
Well, ethanol burns real well. They put it in gasoline. They mix gasoline with it for your car. So, I mean, it's a compound that will cause fire to spread very rapidly.
So now, did this CS gas, it doesn't just float around in the air, it also penetrates.
It penetrates into wood and cloth and things like that, to the point where even if they had come out the building would have been useless. It would have been destroyed.
Now, CS gas, how long did they pour this into the complex?
From 6 a.m. to 12 noon, about 6 hours.
How long can a person expect to stand to be in that type of an environment?
They have gas masks. As long as the gas masks don't get clogged up, you can continue to breathe. But once the filters are clogged and you don't have any replacement filters, you're out of luck. You can't breathe.
Okay, gas mask that could get clogged up. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Well, the proboscis on the front of a gas mask has a little filter at the face of it. You can unscrew it and put a new one in it, a fresh one. About every 20 minutes you change the filters, but when you run out of filters, you've run out of luck.
All right. Going back to the picture that we have here, we can see that, as many people saw on TV, tanks were puncturing holes into the roof here, as you said, to provide excellent ventilation.
The roof had no air conditioning ducts, no heating ducts. It was basically a wind tunnel. The booms cut through not only the first floor, but through the second floor, and allowed the floor on the second floor to basically become a chimney.
Now, a lot of people watching this on TV were only able to see the front of the compound. Now, as this next picture will indicate, there was a tremendous amount of damage that went on behind the compound that was basically out of the sight of all of the cameras and spectators there. And if we could go to that picture, we would be able to see that. As you can tell, all of the, if you can identify the certain parts that we have here of the complex.
Well, where I'm pointing my finger is the right side of the gymnasium, and it's been totally destroyed by a tank. So, I mean, they weren't just venting it, they were destroying the building.
Now, this was not, I did not see that on national TV when I was watching that.
No one could. All the cameras are on one side of the building.
Now, according to your investigation, what further use could this have been to the law enforcement officials that were there?
Well, it made it very possible for that fire to accelerate at about 3 times the velocity, because the whole rear of the building was wide open, so that the wind could basically flash over the fire that did get ignited to ignite all the corners of the building. They didn't need to have separate fires started. It just raced around the building.
Okay, this CS gas, whenever it is exposed to a flame, does become very explosive and can cause sparking from one particle of the gas to the next particle. And if gas is saturating the building, then you have a fireball effect.
Yeah, you basically burn down the building almost instantly.
All right. Now, there was a lot of speculation that when the Davidians were trying to escape, that they were being shot at. Have you heard anything such as that?
I've actually talked to a policeman who saw a videotape taken from the rear of the building very recently that indicated 3 or 4 people came out the back of the building and fell down. And he attributes the falling down to gunshots, which are heard in the other tapes that were made during that day.
But when we were watching the front of it, we didn't see any gunshots.
Well, we couldn't hear any gunshots. The cameras were 2.5 miles away from the building.
2.5 miles? Why were they not allowed to be closer?
To get closer, then they could see what was happening.
So what you're alleging is that this was the government's intent to trap these people.
I believe that their intent was to trap them and to incapacitate them and to poison them with cyanide gas, and they probably came through there in the last 3 or 4 minutes right when the fire began to ignite, and the hydrogen cyanide was in there. We have indications of that from the FBI agents taking their respirators off right after the fire started, and you can see them exiting the building. So based upon the gunshot wounds that they have and the fact that the Davidians had no .45 caliber pistols, one could reasonably deduct that they were shot while they were wiggling on the ground, including the babies.
Now, that's something else that the autopsies pointed out, and I viewed some of the autopsy reports. It was amazing how many small children and infants and even children that were still not born yet had been shot by gunfire.
Well, if you want to demonize somebody, you make it look like they did it.
Make it look like it was suicide, a mass suicide.
Sure.
All right, well, let's go to our next picture. And Gordon, you can explain some more to us about this. What does this picture show?
Well, as I'm pointing over here, you can see that the entire building is destroyed. There's a tank actually about right where my finger is pointing. There is a tank in there. If I drop my fingers down and come over to here, you'll find 7 bodies listed right across here who apparently were arguing with the tank and lost.
Now, where were you were speaking of bodies, where were the majority of bodies found?
The majority of the bodies were found in the area having right here going forward to the dining room. So we're now in the dining room area coming right here. All through here, there were about 72 bodies found.
Why would there be such a high concentration of bodies in that one area?
Because the way the gas moved through the building, as the cyanide gas moved through, these areas became untenable to breathe in. And their gas masks, they only had 20 gas masks for 80 people. The children had no gas masks, so they were all incapacitated or actually dead from the hydrogen cyanide gas released out of the CS gas crystals.
Okay, so is it possible that the majority of these people had died of hydrogen cyanide poisoning before the fire ever began?
Correct. Or they were completely incapacitated to the point they were just on the ground wiggling.
Well, let's take a look at the next picture that we have here. And now, can you describe that scene to us?
Well, that scene is the fire over where your head is, approximately right here, starting for the first time. Actually, this is the first picture that's ever been shown to the public ever that where the fire actually started, and assuming that these pictures haven't been tampered with, this would be good evidence that the fire started at the southeast corner of the building. But that picture where your head is, right before that fire starts, is a tank there inside that building, right at that point where the smoke is.
Okay, now what does a fire have to do with the CS gas? A lot of people may not completely understand that.
Well, the government failed to tell the public that if you heat the CS gas up a mere 100 degrees, you will release hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide in vapor form. There's a high probability most of this white smoke is hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide.
All of this white smoke that we see here, this is CS gas, if I'm to understand that.
It's its constituents. It's CS gas and its heated constituents, which would be cyanide and chloride, or hydrogen chloride, hydrogen cyanide, and carbon monoxide, all of which are deadly.
For how long was this gas pumped into the complex?
6 hours. They were mostly dead. I would bet most of them were dead when the fire got going.
Okay, the majority of the autopsy reports did state that most of the occupants did die.
That's correct, but they said that they died of smoke inhalation. They just forgot to tell the public what the smoke was, cyanide, which was part of the cover-up that's been going on since day one of this.
Okay, I guess a person would want to ask right off the bat is, why would the government want these people exterminated?
Well, in all probability, based upon the people that we've interviewed, the top of the building was filled full of gunshot holes from the helicopters who came in a few moments before the ATF agents exited the trailers, and they were shooting like they did in Vietnam. When they would attack a building like this, they'd shoot up the ceiling so that everybody would get down. Well, you can't very well charge these people with the crimes they've charged them with if you got a building that's got 500 holes in the ceiling. That's kind of shoot first and ask questions later. That's sort of like, you know, that's a no-knock warrant in the max. I mean, you go. They had no search warrant with them when they went out there, so they obviously weren't trying to serve a search warrant. What they're trying to do is kill all these people.
Okay.
Period.
Let's go to the next photo. Interesting to note that in that manual they only recommend up to 40 or 50 canisters of CS gas, but from what we understand, there were literally barrels that were being used by the law enforcement agents. Is that true?
That's correct. There appeared to be about 20 barrels of the omnichlorobenzolidine malonitrile, which is $7 a gram at list price, or about $1 million a barrel to kill these people.
Now describe this photo for us.
This is a photo looking at the southeast corner in the front of the building. This is where tanks had gone through it, and the time on that photograph is somewhere around 12:19. The fire's just breaking out, appears to be just breaking out here in the corner, but there's a tank in the subsequent photographs right just a minute or so before here. There's a tank that is going in here tearing up the building where it ignites. So one could conclude that the tank might have set the fire in all probability by firing a CS canister round from one of its ferret rounds in there.
And from what we understand, CS, even the explosive charge, which is used to disperse the CS, can cause an explosion and the flame.
Has done it many times before.
All right. You were mentioning the time sequence on these pictures. It was interesting to note that the government reports that the fire started at approximately 12:07. However, from what we understand, there are infrared points that show that the fire started closer to 11:40, that there was some type of flame around 11:40 or 11:47 in that time.
That is a controversial issue right now. I've been in favor of the theory of what's indicated there, but the bulk of the evidence indicates that the best knowledge that we have right now is that the fire started somewhere between 12:05 and 12:07 in that right-hand corner of the building. First time that fire is actually in smoke is seen coming out of that building. But it spread so rapidly that one could have to believe that somebody was spreading it, and the tank was in control of the area in the rear. When the rear caught on fire, the tank was in control there.
All right, now, what we see in this picture, do we see any white smoke, black smoke that you can point out to us, or is this...
Well, all I can see from this picture here, and it's hard to make out what's going on, but this appears to be mostly white smoke. There's a lot of white smoke, which can be gas being injected in the other side of the building, on the other side of the building here.
All right, let's go on to the next photo. All right, now there is a good photo of definitely, I believe, some white smoke.
Mm-hmm.
But can you describe this photo to us?
It's still white smoke coming from the fire moving down the building here. And you'll notice it's like a half a minute later, so it's moving very rapidly through the wind tunnel of the upper part of the building, which is carrying it not only through the wind tunnel, but back down into these fire flues, depending on which way the winds are flowing at that point, inside of there. All calculatable, I might add.
Oh, it is very calculated.
Oh, yeah, there's computer studies that'll tell you how to do this to a T.
That would be the...
Called ASHRAE.
Okay. And now, I will only assume that the government has people in their facility who can...
Government knew that they were creating... you would call it a fire hazard if you want to call it a fire hazard, but they were creating a very, very fast bonfire in which they planned to burn all these people up. I mean, I've looked at this, and I'd rather believe otherwise, but the bulk of the evidence points out the government had all the scientific capability of knowing exactly what was going to happen in there. They knew there was only one fire extinguisher in the building. They knew they had shut off their water, and there was no more water in there, much less to put out to drink, much less to put a fire out with. So one can only deduct that their intentions were not very good, murderous in fact.
All right, Gordon, there has also been several reports that someone had called the Weather Service several times that morning looking for wind direction, wind velocity. Have you heard of such reports?
Oh, I know they'd been doing, first they'd been firing shells out there and doing smoke trailers for days on end out there before they set the fire. But they knew 72 hours beforehand from the Weather Bureau, from the historic wind patterns out there, which way the front was coming. They knew this wind was going to blow like that.
And
they knew that.
Gusty.
Yeah, they picked that day to do this so that it would burn the building down quickly. That's what they were waiting for, was high pressure winds, so that they wouldn't be accused of not doing their job well.
Basically, from what you've just told me, if the winds were very high gusty, there was a fire, it would only be natural for most people who don't know this much about chemistry, it'd be only natural to assume that, well, the wind made the fire spread so quickly.
Well, the wind helped, definitely helped. The thing but it was helping a flamethrower is what it was doing. The CS gas functioned like a propellant in a flamethrower. It extended the fire field and the flame field much quicker than it would have been otherwise. It just lit up like the air was atomized with gasoline in it. So it almost blew up. The only reason it didn't blow up is because of those big holes. Let the pressure out as it caught on fire.
That roof, going from one side to the other, those were all connected.
It's all wide open, all connected and all wide open.
So once you, if you were to put gas on one side with the prevailing winds, it would go all the way across the complex.
In about 10 seconds. There were huge sheets of flame leaping through the building.
Well, the question had been raised so many times about how could it go from one side to the other, and then allegations were made that the Davidians started the fires themselves, and that accounted for why there was a fire on one side and then suddenly a fire on the other.
The Davidians were set up for, the Davidians, who were totally non-suicidal, very Christian in their mentality, they were very anti-suicide, were basically given that vis-a-vis the Jim Jones thing, so that when the time came to kill them, they could say, oh my God, we're so surprised they're killing themselves. So on one hand they say they may kill themselves, on the other hand say they're not going to kill themselves. Well, we do know that they use that as a convenient excuse for getting away with the murder that they've done so far.
This is an excellent photo of all of the cloud of white smoke. What can we only assume that this white smoke is?
Well, based upon what we know about what was going on there, most of that white smoke is hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide and hydrogen chloride. Those are what the white smoke are. It's the CS gas being burned.
And as the picture shows, a tremendous amount of this, just thick.
You couldn't breathe in it. You die. That'll kill you.
Even if it was just regular smoke.
Right. That's America's first Auschwitz there, right there. That's America's first Auschwitz. They're gassing them prior to cremating them.
Ferret rounds are non-pyrotechnic. They simply burst on impact and release their invisible gas in an instant. There are also non-incendiary grenades that contain a small explosive charge and do produce a dust, but no smoke and not enough heat to cause a fire. Pyrotechnic devices, though, actually burn, and as they do, tear gas is dispersed. An example is this 37mm round called speed heat. It burns for between 15 and 30 seconds. Here's what the methods look like side by side. The non-pyrotechnic round in the lower right produces just a brief puff of dust. A pyrotechnic grenade in the lower left produces a sustained cloud of smoke, visible for 20 seconds. You can see how those compare with what was coming from the bunker at Mount Carmel last April 19th. None of the official reviews of the fire addresses the apparent discrepancy.
I approved the plan and I'm responsible for it. I advised the president, but I did not advise him as to the details.
I'm the president of the United States, and I signed off on the general decision and giving her the authority to make the last call. And I said, if you decide to go forward with this tomorrow, I will support you, and I do support her.
Yeah, certainly he is responsible, but it's the Attorney General and the FBI have operational control over this, but clearly he was informed.
specimen. I tell you, in all my years involved with SWAT, I've never seen a gentleman like this that I've learned so much from in just the short time I've been around him. It's just awesome is about the only word to describe him.
Honed to a fine edge, honed to kill.
Just in case you don't remember, let me jog your memory. In a church they called the Waco compound, back in April '93, 17 little children, all so helpless and so small, died a senseless death of gas and flames. How many names can you recall? 17 little children. Don't it make you wonder why? 17 little children, how could they deserve to die? Maybe we should stop and ask ourselves, have we become so blind? Will 17 little children finally open up your mind? How did you sleep last night, Bill Clinton? Tell me, did you feel their pain? As 17 little children cried out and perished in the flames. Attorney General Janet Reno, I accept your offer to resign. How can you stand for law and order now when you won't answer to your crimes? 17 little children, all so helpless and so small. 17 little children, how many names can you recall? Maybe we should stop and ask ourselves, have we become so blind? Will 17 little children finally open up your mind? I've heard it said the Branch Davidians only got what they deserved, yet no one seems to know what laws were broken, what was in the warrant they never served. Yesterday I sold my TV set, stopped my subscription to the Times. To me it's plain to see the media was an accomplice to these crimes. 17 little children, don't it make you wonder why? 17 little children, how could they deserve to die? Maybe we should stop and ask ourselves, have we children, finally open up your mind. Open up your
I just say that, in agreement with my mother, that, we hope that these people didn't die in vain. We don't believe they did, but one of the things that will make it worthwhile, you might say, is that other people sit up and take notice. For one thing, they stand up for their rights as American citizens, and that they perhaps, out of all this, will come a tolerance for minorities, whether it's racial minorities or religious minorities, because this could happen to anybody. And so, I hope that this is a wake-up call to the American public, and I think we're seeing a response from individuals around the states and around the world that, they have been made aware of what this government is doing and what's going on that they didn't have before. Maybe they were too complacent before. They're beginning to take stock of how things are being conducted here in this country, and that hopefully, the American people can determine to, as I say, be more fair and more willing to see that the laws for religious liberty and freedom of speech and so forth are carried out without oppression. If we've got oppressive government, then they need to do something in the polls or whatever it's going to take to rectify that. They need to, put us, if they can, and make an effort anyway, to put a stop to government running amok and being oppressive.